I remember the exact moment it all fell apart. My uncle slammed the door behind me and yelled, "No niece of mine works in tech support." I stood on the porch, my bag in hand, feeling both humiliated and strangely alive. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have dared dream beyond my family's narrow expectations. But what if I told you that being thrown out was the best thing that ever happened to me? That text I received that night from someone I'd never met changed everything. And if I'm honest, you won't see the ending coming. I still hear the echo of my uncle's voice slamming through the hallway. "No niece of mine works in tech support." The words hit me like a sledgehammer, not just rejecting my career, but rejecting me. My chest felt tight, my hands trembled, and a wave of humiliation washed over me. I had spent years studying, working tirelessly to climb even the smallest rung in the tech world, yet here I was, cast aside like I had no worth. The room was cold, suffused with the suffocating air of judgment, and every picture on the wall seemed to remind me that I had been a disappointment. My mother stood silently, her eyes avoiding mine, while my aunt fidgeted, clearly torn between taking sides and staying out of the confrontation. My younger cousins watched, wide-eyed and confused, as the adult voices thundered, leaving me feeling smaller than I ever had. I clenched my fists, wanting to scream back, to tell them they had no idea what I was capable of, but the words stuck in my throat. I realized yelling would do nothing to change their minds. I was alone here, even in my own family, which should have been my safe harbor. My uncle's eyes were hard, unyielding. Every syllable of his condemnation drilled into me. I was unprofessional, a failure, and entirely unworthy. In that moment, it didn't matter that I had managed projects, solved problems, or earned small victories outside of their world. None of it meant a thing to them. Their definitions of success were rigid, tied to prestige and titles that my path did not yet have. The moment passed like a slow, torturous drip of water. I gathered my courage, forcing my legs to move, and started packing my things. Each item I placed in my small, worn backpack felt like shedding a part of the life they had tried to force onto me. The books I cherished, the laptop I had painstakingly saved for, the notebooks filled with ideas, they all went in. It was strange to feel both grief and liberation at the same time. I hadn't chosen this path willingly, they had chosen it for me. But now, the choice was mine, and strangely, that gave me a flicker of hope. The hallway seemed endless as I walked out the door, every step an echo of defiance and sorrow intertwined. Then my phone buzzed. I paused, unsure if I should look, expecting maybe a final insult or a mocking message. Instead, the screen lit up with words that would haunt and inspire me for years to come. "Don't give up. I know you can do this." I stared at it, my heart thudding, my mind racing. Who could possibly know? Who would even care? I didn't recognize the number, but the words struck deeper than any lecture or reprimand my family had ever given. It was a small lifeline in a sea of rejection, a mysterious acknowledgement that I was not invisible. For the first time that night, I allowed myself a tentative spark of curiosity. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. The city outside was quiet, streets dimly lit under the sodium glow of street lamps. I walked without a plan, letting the night air brush against my cheeks. Each breath was sharp with cold and adrenaline. I passed closed cafes, silent cars, and shuttered windows. A city that seemed to have forgotten life. Yet, paradoxically, it felt alive. The anonymity of the streets brought both comfort and unease. I was small in this vast expanse, yet oddly free. Every shadow whispered possibilities. Every flicker of light hinted at unseen opportunities. I couldn't help but wonder if leaving my family meant stepping into a world where I could finally define myself. I found a bench outside a quiet park and sat, letting my backpack drop to my side. The weight of the day pressed on me, and I allowed myself to breathe, to acknowledge the raw mix of emotions twisting inside. Anger, grief, shame, and a subtle thread of excitement tangled together. The city hummed softly beneath the distant rumble of a late bus, the muffled sound of traffic, and the occasional bark of a dog. I thought of all the nights I had spent trying to fit into molds not meant for me, all the expectations that had suffocated my ambition. For the first time, I felt a curious blend of solitude and potential. There was no blueprint, no safety net, just me and the possibilities that stretched before me. I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, maybe I can actually do this. And yet, the uncertainty gnawed at me. Who was I without their approval? Was I capable of building a life where my value wasn't measured by their standards? Every instinct told me to doubt, to retreat, to find some familiar corner of the world to hide in. But the mysterious message lingered in my mind, a small ember that refused to extinguish. I looked around, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows, to explain, to validate, to offer guidance. But there was no one, only the silence and the faint buzz of the city at night. It was a silence that both terrified and emboldened me. This moment was mine alone, the first decision I had made entirely for myself. And it terrified me. By the time I rose from the bench, the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with a pale glow. My thoughts were still swirling, fragmented with fear and hope, yet there was a quiet determination beneath it all. I had nowhere to go, no plan, and no one to rely on, but for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like a curse. It felt like freedom. Every step I took away from that house, from their judgment, carried with it a small rebellion, a quiet promise that I would define my own worth, my own success. And as the city began to stir, I realized something I hadn't known I needed. I was ready to see what I could truly become. The first week after leaving home was harsher than anything I had imagined. Every morning, I dragged myself out of a cramped shared apartment, its peeling walls and dusty floors reminding me that comfort was a luxury I no longer possessed. The jobs I managed to scrape together paid barely enough for a bed and a few meals, and each shift at the call center seemed to strip a little more confidence from me. Colleagues whispered about me behind my back, subtle smirks and rolled eyes piercing my already fragile sense of self. It was exhausting, demoralizing, and sometimes I questioned whether I had made a mistake leaving the only family I had ever known. But even in the monotony, I clung to the spark that had carried me out the front door that night. Every free moment I had was devoted to learning, to reclaiming a sense of purpose. Online courses in cybersecurity became my lifeline. I absorbed concepts late into the night, tutorials lighting up my laptop screen as the city outside grew quiet. I set up my own small projects, testing firewalls, experimenting with coding, and simulating breaches. Each success, no matter how minor, gave me a whisper of hope, a sense that perhaps I could navigate a world where my skills mattered. Yet, progress was rarely linear. Mistakes were frequent and humbling. My first real project, a small but complex website vulnerability scan, ended in disaster. Someone hacked my test environment, erasing weeks of work. I froze, staring at the screen in disbelief, my chest tightening as panic and frustration collided. But somewhere in that panic, determination sparked. I refused to let failure define me. I dug in, analyzing logs, tracing paths, and eventually identifying the breach. Solving it didn't erase the fear, but it reminded me that I had the skills to persevere. It was during one of these late nights, hunched over my laptop with a mug of cold coffee, that I noticed a private message on a cybersecurity forum. The username was unfamiliar. Lucas Trent 1987. His message was short, deliberate. I've been watching your progress. You have potential beyond your current projects. If you're interested, I can offer guidance, an opportunity to work on something real. I froze. The anonymity, the specificity, it was impossible to ignore. Who was this person? Why was he reaching out? And more importantly, could I trust him? Questions swirled in my head, yet curiosity outweighed fear. The promise of guidance, of finally working on projects that mattered beyond my lonely apartment, ignited something I hadn't felt in months. I responded cautiously, exchanging a few messages before agreeing to a voice call. Lucas's presence was calm, yet commanding, his voice carrying authority without arrogance. He had a history in the field, projects that were rumored to be almost legendary among insiders. He spoke of challenges that would stretch my abilities, of a level of work I had never dared dream of. But even as excitement bubbled in my chest, a seed of doubt lingered. He didn't reveal everything. There were gaps, omissions, hints that not all details would be straightforward or safe. That uncertainty made my pulse quicken. Part of me wanted to run, to retreat into the familiar anonymity of my small jobs. But a larger, louder part of me recognized a rare opportunity. The risk was undeniable, but so was the potential for growth. Days turned into nights, and I found myself drawn into a rhythm of intense study and small real-world projects, guided remotely by Lucas's cryptic but insightful instructions. Every successful exploit, every firewall I breached in his simulated tests felt like a tiny victory reclaiming pieces of myself I thought were lost. And yet, each interaction with him carried a subtle tension. There was never complete clarity. Always a hint that the next task might challenge me in ways I couldn't anticipate. This constant uncertainty made me hyper-aware, stretching my mental limits, and yet also keeping me utterly engaged. I realized that this was what it felt like to be fully alive, when stakes were real and consequences tangible. Even amidst the exhilaration, there were moments of exhaustion and despair. My apartment remained sparse and cold, my meals often irregular, and the isolation gnawed at me. Some nights I would stare at the ceiling, my mind churning with anxiety, wondering if I had bitten off more than I could chew. Yet, every morning, Lucas's voice or the next message reminded me that I was not alone, that my skills were recognized, and that failure was just a step in the process. I began to see patterns, anticipate challenges, and refine my strategies. My confidence grew incrementally, each day building on the last, transforming my initial panic into cautious optimism. Then came the micro cliffhanger that kept me awake for hours. One evening, while reviewing code, I noticed unusual activity in my project logs. An unauthorized access point had been created. Someone had hacked into my personal sandbox environment. My heart raced as I scanned every line of code, tracing the intrusion. Was this a test from Lucas? Or had someone external discovered my growing skills and decided to challenge me? The uncertainty pressed down on me, yet I found an odd thrill in the challenge. I couldn't ignore it. I decided to investigate, knowing that solving this puzzle could prove not only my technical ability, but my resilience. This single incident encapsulated the essence of my new life: unpredictable, frightening, but brimming with possibility. By the end of the week, I had started to feel a subtle shift. I was no longer the small, powerless girl cast aside by her family. The small victories, the mentorship, even the failures were shaping a version of me that was capable of facing challenges head-on. Lucas's cryptic encouragement and the ever-present uncertainty added a layer of suspense that made me question what opportunities lay ahead and whether I would be ready when the next test arrived. I realized that even in failure, in loneliness, and in doubt, I had begun to carve out a space for myself, a realm where I mattered. And though the path was still unclear, I knew that every line of code, every late night, and every risk taken was bringing me closer to the person I was meant to become. The breakthrough came quietly, without fanfare, in the middle of a rainy Tuesday evening. I was hunched over my laptop, reviewing network logs for a mid-sized company's test environment, when something caught my eye. A subtle anomaly, buried deep within the encrypted traffic patterns, suggested a vulnerability so significant that, if left unchecked, it could compromise thousands of user accounts. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a test project anymore. This was real. I triple-checked every line, ran simulations, and confirmed what I suspected. I had discovered a flaw that could have serious consequences. My hands shook as I drafted a responsible disclosure report, detailing every step without exaggeration, without claiming more than what I had verified. Submitting the report was a careful dance. I emailed the company directly, providing evidence and suggesting remediation steps while protecting myself from legal exposure. Then I waited. The silence that followed was unbearable. Each ping of my inbox made me jump, my mind spinning with scenarios of rejection, dismissal, or even threats. But when a reply finally came, acknowledging my report and thanking me for my integrity, a surge of validation coursed through me. I had contributed meaningfully, my work had impact, and for the first time, people outside my apartment walls recognized my skill. Within hours, messages from online cybersecurity communities began trickling in. Strangers, professionals in the field, praised the thoroughness and accuracy of my work. My small corner of the digital world had noticed me, and it was exhilarating, intoxicating even. But as with all things that rise quickly, shadows followed. Later that night, I received an anonymous message on one of the forums where I had posted about responsible disclosure. It was cryptic but unmistakable. Someone was watching. Someone else knew of the vulnerability I had reported. My stomach twisted, an uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. Were they friendly? Competitors? Malicious actors waiting to exploit the same flaw I had just neutralized? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty made every subsequent click and code review feel heavier, more precarious. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that vigilance was part of the field, but deep down, I knew the game had just escalated. Just when I thought the night couldn't become more complex, a new opportunity arrived. A startup with a reputation for cutting-edge technology reached out to me. Their offer was alluring. They wanted me to join as a consultant to help their team identify and exploit vulnerabilities for profit. The catch, the ethical dilemma, struck me immediately. My instincts screamed caution. I had always prided myself on integrity, on reporting responsibly rather than bending the rules for money. But the offer was substantial. The resources they could provide were unlike anything I had access to, and the challenge promised exposure and growth that could accelerate my career beyond imagination. My mind whirled, torn between ambition and principle. I couldn't make the decision alone. I reached for my phone and typed a message to Lucas, explaining the offer, my fears, and the moral tug-of-war that weighed me down. He responded, as always, in measured, cryptic tones, urging me to consider long-term consequences, the kind of opportunities that align with both skill and conscience. Reading his words, I felt a flicker of clarity, but the tension lingered. My heart raced with conflicting emotions, excitement, fear, guilt, and a strange, exhilarating sense of possibility. The question now wasn't just about my career. It was about who I wanted to be. Every scenario I played out in my mind came with its own set of consequences. Accepting the offer could catapult me into a high-profile position with wealth and influence beyond anything I had known. Yet, compromising my ethics could haunt me forever. Declining it might preserve my integrity, but at what cost? The path forward was unclear, and the weight of choice felt almost physical, pressing down on my shoulders. I paced the small confines of my apartment, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen, wondering what any of this would mean in a month, in a year, or 5 years from now. Amid the storm of thoughts, I reminded myself of what had brought me here, the nights I had spent learning, the failures that taught me resilience, the victories, small and large, that had built the foundation for moments like this. I realized that no matter what decision I made, I had already proven something fundamental. I was capable, resourceful, and unafraid to face consequences. My hands shook as I began drafting a reply to the startup, outlining questions, setting boundaries, and probing the offer's parameters. Even the act of engaging cautiously gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. And yet, the suspense lingered. Who else knew about my discovery? Would the competitor observing me make a move while I deliberated? Every notification pinged with potential danger or opportunity, and every choice felt like a fork in a labyrinth with unseen exits. I sat back, took a deep breath, and typed into my notes. This is where the real challenge begins. Make the decision, face the consequences, and trust yourself. The tension, the uncertainty, the ethical maze, they all combined into a heady mix that made me feel more alive than I had in years. And deep down, a voice whispered that once I navigated this crossroads, nothing would ever be the same again. By the time I closed my laptop for the night, my mind was a whirl of possibilities and fears. The micro cliffhangers of the day, the competitor watching, the ethical dilemma, the startup offer, kept me on edge, yet also focused. I realized that each obstacle, each choice was shaping me, honing my skills, and preparing me for challenges even larger than I could imagine. And though sleep would be fitful, my resolve was clear. I was ready to step into the unknown, to test not only my technical abilities, but my character, and to see where this path would truly lead. The day I officially launched my cybersecurity company felt surreal, almost like stepping into a new dimension of life. The small apartment that had witnessed so many late-night coding marathons now felt like a relic of the past. I rented a modest office space downtown, its walls bare, the furniture minimal, but every corner whispered possibility. Naming the company Harper Security Solutions felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had once thought lost. The first few clients were small businesses, hesitant but trusting. Every successful project, every system I fortified, built a quiet credibility that began to ripple outward. Slowly, the attention of larger companies arrived, intrigued by reports of my earlier vulnerability discovery. I remember the first major client call vividly. Their voice was skeptical at first, testing my knowledge, probing for weaknesses. I answered carefully, confidently, each word a testament to countless nights of practice and study. By the end, they were impressed, and the contract was signed. It was validation, yes, but it also felt like the weight of expectation had doubled. My company's reputation now rested on my shoulders, and every decision mattered in a way it never had before. Success was intoxicating, but with it came the constant undercurrent of anxiety. The first major public case my team and I handled involved a targeted ransomware attack on a multinational client. Hours blurred into days as I coordinated defenses, traced back the intrusion, and guided my small team through mitigation and recovery. Watching the news cycle amplify our efforts was surreal. Tweets, tech blogs, and online forums discussed our strategy, our tools, and, most thrilling of all, my name. The thrill of recognition pulsed alongside exhaustion and stress. I felt alive in ways I hadn't before, riding the highs of public acknowledgement and the lows of relentless responsibility. Each victory was exhilarating. Each failure, no matter how small, stung sharply. My life had become a roller coaster, a true emotional sine wave that left me breathless but hungry for the next challenge. Yet the sense of triumph was short-lived. One morning, while reviewing logs, I noticed irregular activity from within my own office network. A trusted employee had been accessing confidential project files without authorization. My stomach tightened, the mixture of betrayal and disbelief almost paralyzing. Was it negligence or something more sinister? I spent hours digging through code, auditing access logs, and confronting the employee. The interaction was tense, uncomfortable, yet necessary. I realized then that running a company wasn't just about technical skill. It was about judgment, trust, and the ability to navigate human complexity. The betrayal, though minor in comparison to the challenges ahead, reminded me that the stakes were real, that I couldn't afford complacency. Before I could fully process the internal challenge, the external threat arrived. Late one evening, a competitor launched a targeted attack on our systems, attempting to extract client data. My heart raced as alarms blared and notifications flooded the dashboard. Panic surged, threatening to overwhelm the sense of control I had worked so hard to build. I felt the familiar twinge of fear, that knot in my stomach that had accompanied me through every critical choice since leaving home. But this time, the challenge was larger and the implications far-reaching. I couldn't make mistakes. Each decision carried potential consequences for clients, employees, and the reputation of my company. I immediately called Lucas. His voice, calm yet firm, grounded me as I explained the breach. I felt a tremor in my voice, an unaccustomed admission of fear and uncertainty. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to be vulnerable. The weight of responsibility pressed down, but Lucas reminded me of my capabilities, walking me through prioritization, triage, and containment strategies. His guidance was precise, methodical, yet encouraging, allowing me to regain control while acknowledging the intensity of the situation. It was humbling to rely on someone else, but necessary. I realized that even the strongest individuals need support, and true leadership wasn't about invulnerability. It was about recognizing limits and acting decisively within them. Over the next several hours, I coordinated the defense. Every line of code mattered, every decision critical. My team moved with precision, and slowly we contained the breach. I could feel the tension in the office lift as systems stabilized, but the adrenaline lingered, a reminder of how close disaster had loomed. In that moment, I understood the delicate balance of success, the exhilaration of triumph paired with the constant threat of collapse. My company's growth was exhilarating, but it demanded vigilance, resilience, and humility. The emotional sine wave continued, exhilaration giving way to fear, relief giving way to reflection, determination swelling anew. By the end of the night, as I finally sank into my chair, exhausted and trembling, I reviewed the events, the internal betrayal, the external attack, the late-night calls and decisions. They had pushed me to a new level of awareness, skill, and emotional resilience. I had confronted threats, protected my clients, and upheld my integrity. Yet I knew the journey was far from over. The micro cliffhanger remained. The competitor was still out there, watching, waiting for the next opportunity. The tension and uncertainty ensured that I could never be complacent, that every success came with vigilance, and that the emotional roller coaster of running a company was only beginning. As dawn crept through the office windows, the city waking below, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. The highs and lows, the victories and betrayals, the sleepless nights, they were shaping me into a leader capable of weathering storms. I thought of the journey from that first night leaving home, carrying only a backpack and a spark of determination. The transformation felt almost surreal, yet undeniably real. I realized that building an empire wasn't about unbroken triumphs, but about embracing challenges, trusting one's instincts, and navigating uncertainty with courage. And as I prepared for the day ahead, I knew that the sine wave of fear, hope, and exhilaration would continue, shaping not just the company, but the person I was becoming. 3 years had passed since I left my family's home, and the world I had built was entirely my own. The office buzzed with the energy of a thriving cybersecurity firm, contracts flowing in from companies that trusted me to protect their digital lives. I had grown into the role I had once dreamed of, yet despite the long hours, the sleepless nights, and the constant stress, there was a quiet satisfaction that accompanied success earned on my own terms. That sense of accomplishment, however, would be challenged in the most unexpected way. The phone rang in the middle of a calm evening. I glanced at the screen, half expecting a client or one of my team members, but the caller ID read my mother's name. My chest tightened, a mix of apprehension and curiosity. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button before finally pressing it. "Olivia, it's Mom." Her voice was hesitant, almost trembling, betraying uncertainty I had rarely heard. I saw a news article. "Why didn't you say you were a cybersecurity billionaire?" I could hear my aunt whispering in the background, their combined voices carrying surprise, worry, and disbelief. For a moment, a rush of old emotions surged through me. Shock, a flicker of anger, the echo of rejection that had once driven me out the door. But I had spent years building not just a company, but a sense of self that was unshakable by mere astonishment or late recognition. I smiled quietly, a slow, controlled smile letting my voice carry calm authority. I didn't feel the need to announce it. I was focused on doing the work that mattered. The words were simple, but beneath them lay the power of my journey, the proof of countless late nights, missed celebrations, and relentless perseverance. Their astonishment hung in the air. I imagined them replaying every moment of doubt, every time they had dismissed my ambitions, and now confronting a reality they had never predicted. I let the silence linger, not cruelly, but intentionally, giving the weight of their realization time to settle. This was my quiet victory. They were forced to acknowledge my achievements without me needing to argue, to shout, or to demand recognition. The twist lingered for the audience, though. Would I forgive, would I reconnect, or would I simply leave them to their shock? As the conversation continued, my tone softened, allowing glimpses of empathy to emerge. I didn't reject them outright, but I didn't embrace them either. I know it might be difficult to understand, but I've built this life one choice at a time. I hope you can respect that. Their voices wavered, caught between guilt, pride, and the realization that their previous judgments had been misguided. It was strange to hear my mother's tone shift from disbelief to tentative humility. This moment became more than acknowledgement. It was a test of boundaries, a subtle dance between reconciliation and self-preservation. Then came the revelation that shifted my perspective entirely. My uncle, the one who had once stood as a figure of strict judgment and rigid expectation, had quietly been observing my journey from afar. He had sent small anonymous notes of encouragement, financial support discreetly, and even shared my achievements with select contacts in the industry, all without my knowledge. The realization hit me slowly, reshaping the narrative I had carried about my family. Not everyone had turned their backs. Some had quietly rooted for me, even when circumstances made overt support impossible. The mix of relief and surprise sent a ripple of gratitude through me, and I allowed myself a rare moment of softness. I spent the next few days reflecting, walking through the office late at night while reviewing project plans, and thinking about the complexity of relationships. The world was not simply black and white, nor were people entirely villainous or benevolent. My success had given me clarity and confidence, but it had also given me perspective. I began to understand that choosing whom to trust, whom to keep close, and whom to distance oneself from was as important as any decision I made in business. The quiet support of my uncle contrasted sharply with the shock and doubt of my mother and aunt, and I realized that true strength lay in discerning these differences, rather than demanding universal acceptance. Later that week, I spoke directly to my uncle, expressing gratitude for his quiet support. He laughed softly, a little embarrassed, and told me, "I've always known you could do this. I just wasn't sure how to say it before." The interaction was subtle, understated, but it resonated deeply. It reminded me that reconciliation didn't need to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes the smallest acknowledgments carry the heaviest weight. I also reached out to my mother and aunt, establishing boundaries and encouraging dialogue, but carefully, ensuring that my emotional well-being remained intact. I recognized that forgiveness and understanding were choices, not obligations. By the end of the week, I felt a sense of equilibrium I hadn't anticipated. The shock and guilt from my family had transformed into reflection and tentative respect, both theirs and mine. I allowed myself to acknowledge the journey that had brought me here, from the nights of fear and uncertainty to the triumphs and challenges of running a company. My personal victories were no longer merely professional. They were deeply intertwined with emotional resilience, the understanding of human complexity, and the cultivation of relationships that truly mattered. As I sat in my office overlooking the city lights, I realized that this moment marked more than recognition. It marked growth, understanding, and empowerment. The emotional sine wave of surprise, anger, relief, and pride had completed its cycle, leaving me centered, confident, and aware. My journey from being cast aside to being acknowledged as a leader in my field had taught me the value of persistence, ethical integrity, and the wisdom of selective trust. The echoes of past hurt lingered, but they were tempered by gratitude, perspective, and the knowledge that I had created a life defined not by others' approval, but by my own vision and tenacity. The morning the Forbes issue arrived on my desk, I almost didn't believe it. My name, Olivia Harper, printed boldly across the cover under the title, 30 Under 30 Rising Cybersecurity Leaders. I held the magazine with a mixture of disbelief, pride, and an unfamiliar tenderness that crept into my chest. 3 years ago, I had been cast out, my ambitions dismissed as foolish and unworthy. Now, my story was being celebrated on a platform read by millions across the globe. The irony wasn't lost on me, and neither, I realized, was the journey it had taken to reach this moment. Sitting at my office desk, I turned the pages slowly, absorbing each word, each photograph, each commentary about the work I had poured myself into. Articles praised the precision of my vulnerability reports, the integrity with which I handled corporate breaches, and the innovative solutions my team had implemented under my guidance. Each paragraph was a testament to the countless nights spent coding alone, to the failures I had survived, to the unwavering belief that I could carve my own path. I felt the familiar sine wave of emotions rise and fall: pride, nostalgia, relief, and a hint of humility that reminded me of the fragile human core beneath the veneer of accomplishment. Then, a new email notification appeared, marked as high priority. I hesitated, knowing that even in the calm after triumph, the world of cybersecurity never truly rested. The message subject read, "Confidential Proposal, International Collaboration Opportunity." My pulse quickened, an electric mixture of curiosity, caution, and the thrill of the unknown. The sender was from an organization I had only heard of in industry whispers, a collective with global influence and resources that could elevate any project to unprecedented levels. The body of the email was concise, deliberately vague, hinting at collaboration that could change the face of cybersecurity worldwide. Micro cliffhanger. It wasn't clear whether this would be a straightforward partnership, a test of skill, or a challenge to my ethical boundaries. I stared at the screen, knowing that accepting, or even responding, would be the start of a journey I could barely imagine. I leaned back in my chair, allowing a slow exhale. In that moment, pride and excitement mingled with apprehension. Despite the fame and recognition, I remained sensitive, cautious, and fully aware of the responsibilities and consequences that came with new opportunities. My heart, always human beneath the professional armor, felt the same pulse of vulnerability and hope I had carried through all those years of struggle. I allowed myself a small smile, recognizing that growth and recognition did not erase the complexity of human emotion. They merely amplified it. The following days were a whirlwind of interviews, calls, and media coverage. Industry leaders reached out, colleagues offered congratulations, and clients expressed admiration for the way I had navigated complex breaches with integrity. I was humbled, yet invigorated. Every word of praise reminded me of the nights I had spent alone, struggling to find my footing, and the messages of encouragement from mentors and allies who had silently guided me along the way. Amidst the celebrations, I took time to reconnect with Lucas. His voice, calm and steady, grounded me as we discussed the implications of the international offer, the potential challenges, and the ethical considerations that would accompany such a partnership. During one late-night conversation, I reflected on the journey that had led me here: the rejection from my family, the endless nights of study, the early failures, and the gradual accumulation of victories, small and large. Lucas listened quietly, occasionally reminding me that resilience and integrity were as crucial as technical skill. I realized that my story was not just one of professional achievement, but of personal evolution, of learning to trust myself, to navigate adversity, and to value relationships built on respect and support. In reconnecting with him, I strengthened the network that had been instrumental in my growth, understanding that collaboration and mentorship were integral to sustaining both success and sanity in a high-stakes field. Even as I embraced recognition and the visibility it brought, I remained conscious of my roots: the lessons learned from rejection, the empathy cultivated through struggle, and the humility earned by surviving uncertainty. My sense of accomplishment was interwoven with gratitude for those who had supported me quietly, for the challenges that had honed my resolve, and for the failures that had taught me the importance of patience and perseverance. The emotional sine wave of my journey had settled into a steady rhythm, a balanced acknowledgement of triumphs and trials, victories and vulnerabilities. By the end of that week, I had taken steps to engage with the international proposal cautiously, drafting questions, setting clear boundaries, and ensuring alignment with my ethical standards. The micro cliffhanger remained unresolved, teasing the next chapter of challenges and opportunities, but I felt ready. I had grown into someone capable of navigating uncertainty with skill, empathy, and confidence. As I closed my laptop and looked out across the city skyline, I allowed myself a quiet reflection. From the girl cast out by her family, carrying only a backpack and determination, to the woman recognized globally for her skill, integrity, and leadership, the journey had been transformative. The recognition was not the culmination, but a milestone, proof that persistence, self-belief, and staying true to one's principles could carve a path even when the world seemed determined to dismiss you. I smiled to myself, knowing that I had built more than a company. I had built resilience, respect, and a life defined on my terms. The final lesson lingered in my mind. Success is most meaningful when it honors both skill and humanity. I had achieved recognition, built influence, and earned admiration, but I had done so without abandoning the person I was, the one who could feel, hesitate, and wonder. And while the international opportunity awaited, full of unknowns and challenges, I felt ready, grounded in experience and guided by the values that had carried me from rejection to recognition. This was not the end. It was the beginning of another chapter, one that promised growth, adventure, and the ongoing test of character in a world that had learned to notice me.